The sun works as amplifier, delivering the message of the planets to us. Wonderful. But if you think of the amplifiers, the sun is not the only amplifier. It's the moon, it's the earth itself is the amplifier.
Wow, yeah.
The air we breathe in, and we ourselves are amazing amplifiers of these influences.
Hello, and welcome to the Seeker Solutions Summit, where you can discover who you are on a deeper level to create freedom, joy, and abundance. I'm so excited today to introduce to you a new speaker we have in the summit, Nadia Smirnova-Mierau. She's a New York-based astrologer, writer, speaker, and ESP practitioner. A former nuclear physicist from Russia, she has been studying and practicing astrology and extrasensory techniques for over 30 years. Her passion lies in deep investigation and explanation of how astrology and extrasensory abilities work from a physics perspective. Her revolutionary theoretical framework explaining the physics behind planetary influence on our daily life and human extrasensory perception is presented in her book, Physics of Astrology. Hello, Nadia, and welcome. Thank you for being here at the summit.
Hello, darling. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you. I love your bio, the work that you do, combining astrology as well as extrasensory perception and techniques and physics. Wow, what an unusual combination of things. I love to hear that those things can come together even. Can you please tell us, what was your journey? How did you discover this and put those very disparate things together in your work?
Great question. Well, I would say that I became an astrologer before I became a physicist. And I was extrasensory, and I discovered my extrasensory abilities also before I became a scientist. And that was in my teens when I discovered that I see dreams that come true. And then I gotten into astrology very deeply immediately. By the age of 20, I was already practicing astrologer and at the same time a student of Moscow University physics department. I ended up graduating as a nuclear physicist, and my friends were making fun of me frequently about astrology because back then, you know, the physicists did not believe in astrology. But I did, and not only I believed it, I felt strongly with all my extrasensory, with my sensitivity, I would say. I felt that it works. You know, it was a done deal for me. I just had to understand how, as a scientist that I am, and possibly explain it to my friends because I knew they were wrong, but I just didn't know how to explain just yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how it all started. So first I was doing it. And then little by little I was thinking, trying to figure out how it works. And then one day, somewhere like 25 years ago, I just had this sudden, you could say, epiphany, revelation, understanding. That's when I started writing. It took me 20 years to actually complete the book.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Wow. I love that your personal experience of it was so real, that it was undeniable to you, that you knew that it was real, that it was true, and that you followed through on that, because it sounds like your training, being in school, being a physicist, was sort of taking you in a different direction. But it sounded to me like that your gut, your knowing, your experience on those supernatural levels, extrasensory perception, was really real. So I think that's a really unique position for you to be in, and then to take both of those things and really feel called to put them together, because that's a missing piece, right? In this world, like there's people who are in one camp and believe in the extrasensory in astrology, and there's people in the other camp who like believe in like science and proving. But the fact that you were called to bridge those two things together is a really unique position. And so I'm so curious. I want to find out more, and I think that I really appreciate the work that you're doing because it does that. It serves that purpose of bridging that gap. So thank you so much for being a voice for that.
And thank you for acknowledging it. It is, in fact, unique position. I'm not the only one who is trying to explain how astrology works. There were great minds that have done that in the past, but they were coming from sciences, that they were scientists first. I mean, some scientists were scientists and astrologers at the same time, like Newton, for example, right? But then he didn't really try to explain it at the time. But then later on, a great a Russian scientist, Chizhevsky, and I mentioned that in my book, he studied the sun, and he basically had his way explaining the effect, the physical effect of the sun and planets onto mass events on the planet, like diseases and wars. And then there was a brilliant British scientist who also studied the sun, Percy Seymour. He wrote a book on magnetic tidal resonance in the 90s, released that book, but he's a scientist. But he created a beautiful base to explain astrology. A little bit nerdy, scientific, but nevertheless.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Can you
here
tell?
I'm both scientist and astrologer, where I understand a lot of astrologers never studied sciences, never looked in that direction. They just live in the mindset that astrology cannot be explained. And I'm trying to explain it to them that it can be. And I am lucky to manage to explain it to a lot of astrologers who now send me thank you notes. They say, thank you. I'm now proudly coming out of the closet astrologers, because they didn't want to tell people they into astrology or do astrology just because people would ridicule them. But now having my book in their pocket, they can come out and say, here you go, astrology has scientific base.
Yeah.
It's a phenomenon that we know exists.
Yeah.
And just because mainstream science doesn't care to explain it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Even in the physical reality, if we have a phenomenon, that means there is physical phenomenon. We just have to discover it.
Yeah, beautiful. So I'm so excited. Can you tell us a little bit more about that connection? How does physics explain the influence of astrology, the reality of that?
Absolutely. And like I like to say, I can explain it in one sentence, or I can talk for several hours. I'll start with one sentence.
Okay.
Well, the first thing, the biggest obvious thing in astrology is the effect of the moon, right? So you may have heard, or people hear, that on a full moon, everything is crazy. There's a lot of activity in police and in hospitals. People going nuts, and everybody likes to go out. And on the new moon, not so much. On the new moon, people are staying low key. And there are statistics out there where there is more happening on the full moon and not much happening on the new moon. So the moon is a physical object. The moon, as we know, creates tidal effect. We could observe it in the large bodies of water. And who are we? We are human beings, and we consist of 70-80% of water. Even our bones have 22% of liquids. We're liquid. Just like the earth is liquid. We think of the earth as solid. No, the earth is liquid. If you look at the entire globe, most of it is water. And even underneath of the crust is sitting on a liquid body, on liquids, right? On top of liquids. So the earth is liquid. Mostly. Of course, if you have a gravitational effect on, and you're trying to observe it on a solid body, you wouldn't see any effect. The effect is there, but you wouldn't observe it. But when you deal with liquids, it's easy. You see tides, you see change of shapes. It's very hard to observe your own change of shape, right? However, it's easier to observe when you see a lot of water, or if you see this for extended period of time, meaning like you accumulate a statistic of a behavior. And because we're liquid, we behave in a liquid form, in a liquid way, sort of. Our behavior is liquid. It's very interesting how you can, if you live by yourself, you wouldn't really put two and two together. On a night of full moon, you might not sleep well, but you wouldn't think of it if you don't know that there's a full moon. But if you, say, are in a big hospital and you're observing a lot of people at the same time, then you notice once a month they're sleepless.
Wow.
Yeah, so you can see that statistical, you could see like a bigger body of liquid, I would say, then it's easier to observe. Or if you're a family man, men typically are less likely to observe something. If you ask a man, do you think you didn't sleep last night because of the full moon? He would say, what full moon? I just couldn't sleep. So they didn't put two and two together. Women more likely to put two and two together. So if a man lives in a household where he has a wife, mother, and 5 daughters, it would be easier for him to see that once a month certain things are out of control and stuff.
Yeah.
We live in this reality and we're not educated to watch those things.
Yeah.
And scientists are not educated, nor are they paid to study this. Mainstream science is an industry. The scientists are not free to study whatever they like. They only study and research on things they're paid to do. So only rare scientists who are either independent scientists or semi-independent, that they can deviate from the direction that they're paid for, and they're there, I would use the word there, to study something alternative, to study a phenomena that they're not supposed to study.
Yeah.
That's why we don't see too many studies in that respect.
Yeah. So thank you so much for bringing this forward, because I think that this type of knowledge and wisdom is really starting to come out. And I love that we're here talking about this right now to share with our audience. I have felt the effect of the moon. I, on a personal level, I follow the cycle of the full moon and the new moon and setting intentions and things like that. And I find it to be very helpful, and it proves to be, there's some kind of energy that's there. And the moon is the closest body near the earth, and so that there's some influence there. But I could also imagine the sun being as big as it is, the light and the energy coming off of the sun, the amount of influence that it has over us must be ginormous in comparison to even the moon. Is that something that also occurs?
Of course, and as a matter of fact, I'm sure like 99.9% people heard of lunar tides, but not a lot of people heard of solar tides. And no one heard of Jupiter tides or Mercury tides or Venus tides.
Oh, yeah.
But they do exist.
Wow.
We have tides that occur due to lunar gravitational influence. Then any physical body out there will create tides as well. But they're not studied that much. The scientists do study solar tides a little bit. They mostly study lunar tides. Nobody studies Mercury tides, Jupiter tides. Jupiter is 300 times bigger than Earth. It's the biggest planet in the solar system. Nobody cares about Jupiter tides. But Percy Seymour, he did write in his book, Magnetotidal Resonance, about these type of tides that are caused by planets on the sun, because the sun was the object he was studying. And he, you should read his book, it's out there. He did conclude that there is a strong influence of the planets on the sun, and these planets cause the sun to create bursts of solar winds and spots, and there's a solar spot cycle is aligned with the Jupiter cycle. It's not a coincidence. And he noticed all of that, and he also created a correlation between positions of planets, right? Square positions, oppositions, and conjunctions, and all positions of planets and events that happen on Earth, because he figured that the sun becomes an amplifier of that planetary influence, which is amazing. So say there's an effect of Jupiter and Mars that are squaring each other, maybe a strong effect onto the sun. The sun amplifies that effect because the sun is, from physics perspective, the sun functions similar to a radio amplifier. The way that radio works, the radio wave that's out there, we're all surrounded by this radio waves, but we're not hearing anything because they're subtle, and when they come into the radio device, they meet with something similar to Tesla coil kind of amplifier, where there is a electromagnetic current that captures that particular wave that it's tuned to and makes it louder, and then we hear it from the radio. Similar to that, the sun, basically the sun, because the masses on the sun, they're all spinning around, and there's a humongous electromagnetic charge there, and they basically amplify that very subtle gravitational influence of Mars and say Jupiter. I'm talking about Jupiter because it's the biggest planet. And the sun works as amplifier, delivering the message of the planets to us. Wonderful. But if you think of the amplifiers, the sun is not the only amplifier. And that's where, as great as Tracy's book is, that's where I realized it's not just the sun. It's the moon, it's the earth itself is the amplifier.
Wow, yeah.
The air we breathe in that we don't see, and we think it's emptiness, but it is an atmosphere, it's gas. Gas is also working as an amplifier. Gas is also experiencing tidal effect. And we ourselves are amazing amplifiers of these influences. Like, I'll give you a simple example. On a full moon, if you're by yourself, you feel a little overwhelmed. You have to do this, you have to do that. But nothing really happens much. You're just a little overwhelmed. If you get together with friends on that day, they overwhelmed, you overwhelmed. That's when you start amplifying each other, resonating, and things can spill over and get crazy. Especially if you start driving, get into traffic, that's where things burst and people affect each other and amplify each other.
Wow, this information is incredibly powerful. It's really opening my eyes to all of these currents of energies that are, waves, influences that are floating all around us, through us, below us, in the earth, in the energy everywhere. And so having some insight into this, like you're saying, through these books, through your work, could be very helpful to know when maybe you're going against that flow, or maybe when you want to switch directions and move into that flow, so that you don't want to get into a car accident. You want to make sure that before you get into your car, you kind of calm down and you find a place and a way to work with those energies. What would you suggest for people to do with all of this influence and energy and things happening there that, to us, like you said, we can't hear it, we don't see it, we don't perceive it? How do we work with those energies?
Well, the advice number one is to pay attention to these things, or to basically acknowledge they exist, right? Because unless you acknowledge they exist, you don't really do anything about it. If you say this particular topic doesn't exist, astrology doesn't exist, or the connection between the planets and us doesn't exist. And then you're in a position that everything that you do every day, you're in charge of it, and you pride yourself by being not affected by the planets. Then if should something happen, it's extremely unsettling for you because you believe you caused it, right? It's a lot of responsibility to carry. That's basically one extreme. Another extreme is when people say, nothing is my fault, everything happened to me. It's all circumstantial and I have no say in it. Everything is fated. So that's another extreme. When people say everything in the hands of God or universe or planets and I have no say in it, right? That's another extreme. So, but if you acknowledge that there are planets that affect you, certain effect you literally cannot escape, but there's also you. If you know about it, you could do something about it. You could basically have a higher understanding of what's happening to you. I'll give an example. For example, we'll take a simple example about driving. If you know it's a full moon, I mean, you could still drive. Just be mindful.
Yeah.
I mean, you should always be mindful when you're driving, but especially on the full moon. But if you don't have to drive, don't on a full moon.
Yeah.
Stay at home. I typically know that when a Mars has, because I'm in Aries and I have Mars conjunct Sun in Aries, I have Mars in Aries, very strong Mars, right? Then I know that if a transit in Mars gets in a certain position and has a harsh aspect to my Mars, on that day, full moon or not, I should not be driving at all. And one time I remember I had to go because I had to go. I agreed that I would be with my friends. And I predicted for myself that I would have an encounter with police, Mars rules police.
No.
I was driving the best, under speed limit the whole time. Everything was good. Only when I gotten there, my friends were not home yet. And it was very snowy. And I called them and I had to wait next to their house before they get there. And I started trying to get onto the driveway, which was under snow. It was the first snow. And to meet the park properly, I had to move my car back and forth several times to create this, parking space for myself in a fresh powder. And then police comes along and they ask me, what are you doing there? Turned out a neighbor saw me doing strange moves on a driveway and they called the police.
Oh, wow.
Encounter, thank God it wasn't a car accident, which could happen with Mars. But it was just the police who came to see what's this areas with the harsh transit in Mars doing on the driveway.
Yeah.
When nobody's home.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. I love that. And so having that awareness, having that foresight really help you to, like you said, thank God it wasn't a car accident, thank God it wasn't something else, avoid something that could have maybe gone negative to now being, it's a pretty neutral event that happened. So working with the energies in that kind of way, it sounds to me a little bit like a dance, that there's these energies here. How do I work around them to make it the best that I can for me in my life today? That's amazing. So I'm glad nothing, bad happened from that experience, but it's a great example on how you use that energy with awareness. And so is that the work that you do with your clients? Is that how you work with them to, identify these phenomenon and try to make the most and the best out of all of these moments?
Sort of, right. So what I do with the clients is we first look at astrology, and typically people want to know what is going to happen, right? They expect predictions into the future.
Yeah.
And astrologers look at how planets move and how they trigger one's natal planets. transiting planets, how they trigger, how they create these resonances, how they create events into the future. And you could plot it on a chart and you could see the sensitive moments in a person's life. And based on which planet triggers what, then you can kind of predict this is what's going to happen. If a person is asking about love, for example, of course, you're going to see what's the Venus doing, what's the Jupiter doing, what's Mars doing, what's Saturn doing, very important for love, and how they're going to trigger certain houses, certain cusps, and when are they going to create events? Because events happen when transits, and I'm talking about transits as the simplest technique for prediction into the future. There are other techniques, how the transiting planets will trigger certain sensitive points in natal chart of a person. Uranus can trigger something love related also. And this happened to one of my clients. Pluto can trigger something. Neptune definitely triggers something. And the further the planet is, the more prolonged effect it has when it triggers. The planets that are very close, or Moon, for example, when they trigger, something happens really quick and less significant than if the big planet is there. It creates a very long array of events, or even changes basically a story that you're living in. And financial matters usually go by the second and eighth house. Then also Jupiter and Saturn are the biggest game changers for financial matters. And you see when Jupiter moves into one of these houses, a lot of money falling onto that person. Saturn moves in, you have to be frugal. And if people don't know why suddenly there is no money and they have to become frugal, they get very upset, depressed even, because Saturn can cause depression. But if they do understand why and what's going on, they can then know for how long it's going to be going on. Saturn is typically spending 2.5 years in one sign. So typically, whatever is happening to the person where there's a lack of resources and the person needs to become a cactus because there is no water coming, right? You have to live in a dry soil. Then, you shouldn't be depressed. Saturn is a great teacher to teach you certain lessons. You just have to learn how to reorganize your life, how to become frugal, spend less, how to live on a minimalistic resources. Sometimes it brings down your health a little bit. That means you have to go and see doctors. And that doesn't mean it's going to be like that forever. You only learn in a certain lesson for 2.5 years. That's it. After 2.5 years, things will go either back to normal or they change for the better. Because even Saturn, that is considered a malefic planet, it's not really malefic. It's a great teacher who changes life for the better if you learn in those lessons the correct way. People who just give in to their sorrow and don't do anything about it, then the Saturn can kill even.
Wow, that's amazing. I love the way that you said that right now, because it makes it seem that even with our ups and downs in our lives, even in a down period, that we can look at where is that light at the end of the tunnel. And during this period, what is here for me to learn? What lessons is Saturn trying to teach me? So it has a very positive focus to it. And also, again, it's like you're working in collaboration with those energies. It's a bit more of an empowered state than to give in to the sorrow and give in to whatever that kind of down moment might be. So I love that, because it's such a positive message that contains within it. So that's beautiful. And another thought came up as you were discussing the planets that are further away. They seem to have a longer influence versus a planet that's really close, or a body that's really close. It seems to be a bit quicker and turns over more quickly. And for some reason, I just it made me think of this image of sort of like a boat going through the water, and up close right behind the boat there's a very small wake, like a wave or something, but further away the wave that the boat leaves behind is this ginormous, it could be quite big, it could take the whole lake even, like that's the field of influence that it has. The wave is also maybe a little smaller, but it's much wider to it. So I imagine that's sort of like the energy that's happening, that the influence of something further away can be quite big and profound because it is so far away, that with the wave of that energy is quite large by the time it comes to us. Would you say that something like that would be accurate? Is that kind of...
Yeah, very much. As a matter of fact, in I think the first chapter of my book, I used the boat and the wave analogy. I even created the graphics to show the boat and the wave, because if you look at life as life is liquid, just like we are, just like our psyche is, you can imagine yourself as a boat in the ocean. And in the ocean, you're going to have an array of different types of waves. Some waves are really huge by themselves, right? And they just lift the boat, and the boat wouldn't even notice something changing because you don't have that device that shows you elevation from the bottom of the sea. You just be on a big wave. The boat will notice only the waves that are similar size, that are gonna be like that. But there's also in between waves, like when you have a storm, it's a huge wave that can actually slap you around. So you have to be a prepared salesman. If you're not prepared for the sea, if you don't have the proper boat, if you don't have proper devices, if you don't have the weather forecast, apps or something, if you these days with your phone, or you have to be prepared if you're going into the ocean on a small boat. You have to know what you're doing, right? So you have to be stronger, more educated. If you're not educated, if you just pop on a boat and go, you'll die. And with life, it's better if you're prepared. And astrology gives you that tool. Like if you learn about astrology, you understand better. You understand how people operate. You understand their psyche. You prepare better for any type of relationship. You can improve your relationships at work, at home, if you understand who's in front of you. And sometimes I get clients who specifically want to understand how to live with other people. So we do synastry astrology. We look at the both charts of people. Could be a mother and a child, could be two lovers or husband and wife, where you could see the dynamic, how people can go destructive way with each other or constructive way with the same exact two charts. A simple analogy is, say we take a sign of water and a sign of fire. Say a woman is a sign of water and a man is a sign of fire. And to be even more specific, I say a woman is a Cancer, a man is an Aries, right? And they're living together. If they don't pay attention why they have fights, why is she crying all the time, and why he's angry all the time. If they don't know that, it's just an abusive relationship, right? But if they do understand astrology, they could see that the relationship between fire and water is not easy. They speak different love language, or they speak different language in general, and it could be constructive or destructive. A destructive relationship is where, say, fire means inspiration. An Aries is an inspiration driven. He generates quick ideas and he acts on them. He gets inspired quickly and he acts on it, right? So Cancer is a water sign living in its reactions and emotions. And destructive way is when water kills fire. way that it happens is the husband comes in, hey babe, I have this great idea. We should go to this mountain. We should like climb it, and that's a brilliant idea. We're gonna exercise and rejuvenate. And she might just make a face or get even upset and say, I don't feel like, and they would talk about feelings. I don't feel like doing it, and you promised me that we go see my mom, and she could start crying, and he would say, oh, you always destroy my brilliant ideas, and then they can get into a fight. She's going to be crying because he promised to go and see the mother, and he doesn't care about the mother-in-law. He wants to go hiking on the mountain. And so, and they might not go anywhere, basically, and they will have a fight. And, you know, she could get upset every time he brings a brilliant idea. So that's a destructive way. Constructive way in this situation would be where fire warms up water, brings it to a boil, to a steam, boiling situation, and that's where they coexist in this very hot but steamy environment. For that, areas need to learn about water, how they operate emotionally, and areas should learn patience with water, right? The biggest thing for Aries, and Aries should be slower with his ideas, more like teasing, warming up, and, you know, get the watery person excited instead of just slamming them with their ideas, right?
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea of steam. Like it's kind of steam also sounds a little bit like hot and sexy as well. So I love that idea.
Those types of couples are frequent.
Yeah.
And they could get very steamy. It could be very exciting relationship. Constructive way, constructive, very exciting.
Right. Yeah. Rather than water splashing down on fire and putting out the fire and there's just smoke and exactly. Beautiful. I love that. You also do work in with extrasensory perception and practices. How does that work together with the astrology work that you do?
I couldn't even imagine doing astrology. I've done astrology without extrasensory, but these days I couldn't even imagine doing it because, I mean, first of all, I'm one human being and it all exists in me.
Yeah.
And back in the day when I was a beginner astrologer and I was already practicing astrology and I already discovered my own psychic abilities, I realized sometimes answering a client's question with the my own extrasensory, my own clairvoyance, my own like intuition, actually gives me like a shortcut. Because with astrology, to answer certain questions, you have to spend time, analyze the chart. You have to dig in, you have to check a lot of things that can take hours. But sometimes you have this vision through your other channels, and that gives you a shortcut. And when I realized how it works, literally how I physically sense that, it was a beautiful discovery for me. Sometimes when you have that, your rational mind puts you in state of doubt, self-doubt, right? So it's very, very fine line between having a clear vision and being confident. This is exactly what's going to happen. Or what has happened when you're looking at a photograph of someone. And a fine line between, am I just fantasizing that? It's just my fantasy. Maybe it's not true. How do I validate, right? So that's a fine line. I found that with astrology, you can validate your psychic vision. You can check. Or with the extrasensory feeling, you can validate what you're saying astrologically, because with astrology, you also need to interpret planetary movement, because you can't just say to a client, you know, in 2025, Saturn will come into your seventh house and your marriage will end. You can't just say that, right? Because that same planet can mean a whole bunch of different other things in that seventh house. The marriage might not end, it might change its shape, right? So you use your extrasensory perception to try and see the picture of what the pattern is going to be doing over there. That's very useful to basically say, well, it might not end, but this is what might happen,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
Astrology itself, there is a beautiful astrological technique that gives you a glimpse into extrasensory reality. It's called Sabian symbol.
What is it called?
Sabian symbol. Sabian,
Okay, Sabian.
Sabian, right. And this is a beautiful technique, one of my favorites, one of my go-to. And if you Google it, if you guys Google it, you're gonna find a website with Linda Hill, and you're gonna find some other websites. The technique was invented over 100 years ago by an astrologer and a psychic, and a psychic
Yeah.
in California. They got together and they assigned a psychic image to each degree in the zodiac circle.
Wow.
So this way you can explore psychically, I mean, with this psychic technique, each degree. Like say, for example, today the sun is in a certain degree the whole day, and you can look up that degree through Sabian symbols, what that means. And interestingly enough, you're gonna see that this day will give you that flavor. Basically, this day is gonna be that story that's in that symbol. It's beautiful.
Beautiful.
The same hour by hour with motion of the moon. Each hour will change the story based on that symbol. It's amazing.
Beautiful.
And you can also read your own chart with those symbols. The moment you're born, planets were in certain degrees, house cusps in certain degrees. You can read the microscopic story portion of your personality that explains a lot.
Beautiful. I love that. I love how accessible that sounds. It sounds like it's something that like someone can like look into and gain some understanding, a little piece of it without having to maybe learn the overwhelming framework, but it's a nice like bite-sized thing. That's beautiful. Gosh, Nadia, I could talk to you all day about this. It's so fascinating, but it looks like we're coming up to the end of our time. But before we go, I want to make sure that we mention that you have brought a free gift with you to the summit for all of our audience. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Because I do love combining science, extrasensory perception, and astrology, or should we start with astrology? It doesn't matter. I do want to give that gift to everyone. I do have a course. I call it Astrology, Science, and Your Psychic Abilities. There's part 1, part 2, and part 3 on my astrologyisscience.com website. But the first part 1 is going to be given to you at no charge, and you're going to find a link wherever Saura puts the links.
Yes,
for
absolutely.
the gift.
Well, thank you so much for that incredibly generous gift. We will have links for it on your speaker page, on Nadia's speaker page, as well as other links to find her website and her social media so that you can find other ways to connect with her. Nadia, thank you so much for being with us here today. It has been such a pleasure. You've been so generous with your time and sharing your knowledge and expertise. Thank you for being here.
And thank you, Saura. You're doing a wonderful, wonderful job with the summit. And I'm happy to have met you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And for all of our audience out there, thank you for your presence here today. I hope that you have found this conversation to be inspirational and have learned a little bit about how science can support astrology as well as that intuitive connection being mixed in there as well. So if you'd like to find out more modalities and more other ways of digging in and finding out more about yourself, please join us again tomorrow for our next interview with our next expert here at the Seeker Solutions Summit. Thank you for your presence here and have a great day. Bye.
Bye.